world's largest economy is slowing down. US GDP grew just 2.1% between April and June, down from 3.1% in the previous quarter. And President Donald Trump blames high borrowing costs.
We're very far from a recession. In fact, if the Fed would do its job, I think would have a tremendous spurt of growth.
Some trade analysts say other factors like the trade war with China and Brexit uncertainty are weighing on demand.
People begin to worry about the potential recession in U.S. ever since, maybe a couple years ago. And the Ukraine invasion is a very strong warning signal. Mm-hmm. It is very important because the U.S. Treasury market is the most liquid market in the world. So basically, people pay attention to it because it represents the collective wisdom of all the investors.
But the government appears unsure about how to boost the economy. On Tuesday, President Trump said he was considering tax cuts.
I would love to do something on capital gains. We're talking about that. That's a big deal, goes through Congress. Payroll tax is something that we think about, and a lot of people would like to see that.
By the next morning, he changed his mind.
I'm not looking at a tax cut now. We don't need it. We have a strong economy.
With or without tax cuts, U.S. consumers may soon be paying more because of the trade war with China. J.P. Morgan says tariffs on Chinese goods are costing the average American household $600 a year. Washington intends to impose tariffs on another $300 billion worth of Chinese exports in December. That could raise the burden on U.S. consumers to $1,000 per household. Some analysts say the best way to revive growth is to end the trade war with China.
It's certainly hurting the U.S., it's certainly hurting China too. A trade war is the only kind of war in which everybody clearly loses. So I'm hopeful, I don't know if I'm going to be accurate, but I'm hopeful that we can both resolve something here. I would love to see that because the U.S. and China are major trading partners.
But with both sides threatening to implement more trade barriers, a truce seems unlikely. And that could mean more hardships for U.S. consumers. Mobin Nasir, TRT World.
For more on this, Matt Maley joins us live now from Newton, Massachusetts. He's Managing Director and Equity Strategist at Miller Tabak. Welcome back to Money Talks, Matt. Now, it's a little hard to keep up with Donald Trump, isn't it? Because first he said he was looking at tax cuts to boost the economy. Now he says that's completely off the table. We can only go by what he tells us, I guess. But what do you think is the truth here? Do you think he is looking at further tax breaks?
Well, yes, I think he's thinking about some of these things because, and it's another reason why he's pushing the Fed so hard to cut interest rates, and that's because as much as he tries to say that the trade war with China is not having an impact in the economy, it certainly is. I mean, we're certainly seeing in certain areas of the economy, especially like in the farmers, are being hurt by it, but certainly other areas, retailers, and automakers. Now that doesn't mean that it's wrong, the wrong thing to do. He and a lot of executives and a lot of politicians from both sides of the political aisle in the U.S. believe this is something we have to do. That we have to change China's trade practices. But there's some pain going to be involved with that, and so I think he's trying to do some of these things to offset what he knows will be a painful process as we continue along in this trade war.
Now, all of this is happening in the environment of, I guess, a growing fear of a US recession, one that would obviously not only impact America, but the rest of the world. Now, how real do you think is that prospect?
Well, it's obviously we're going to have. There isn't an economist in the world that would say that we're not going to have a recession. Of course, we'll have another one. The question is when. I do think that after 10 years, the odds obviously are quite high that we're closer to the one than we were a short time ago. That doesn't mean it's happening tomorrow. But to answer your question more directly, I do think that there is concern out there. I mean, we have a situation where the yield curve is turning negative. People keep trying to say that the yield curve doesn't matter as much anymore. But they said the same thing about the Fed's tightening policy. Remember when they were engaged in their tightening cycle cycle of 2017, 2018, everybody said, oh, don't worry about it because rates are really, really low. It won't have as big an impact. Well, of course, it didn't until it did. And we saw the big correction of the fourth quarter. And we've seen the impact it's had on the slowing of the economy, although not to the recessionary levels. And I think that's the same thing we're seeing with the yield curve now. It's showing that the economy is slowing, and the odds of a recession in sometime in the next 12 months, certainly in the next 24 months, is higher than they've been in a long time.
Interesting. Now, Donald Trump has repeated his attacks against the US Federal Reserve, as you pointed out, on Twitter and in his public statements. But what role do you think the US Fed has to play here? Do you think that a further cut in interest rates will help to stave off this recession?
Well, the Fed is in a very difficult place right now because they've already stepped forward and trying to done some preemptive move by cutting rates in July. Now, I mean, and they kind of stepped back and said, now we're going to wait a little while and see how things play out. If they get pushed, if they do something now, especially if they do something in September very quickly, especially if it happens before we see a further downturn in the markets or a further downturn in the economy, people are going to start being more adamant about saying that the Federal Reserve is being controlled by the president. They want to avoid that. So they have to try walk this fine line. The president wants them to offset what he's doing with his trade policies, and the Fed is trying to keep a situation where they'll play it according to the data. So right now, I think the Fed's going to be very important to what happens going forward over the next 6 to 12 months. But we have to stop depending so much on the Federal Reserve and look towards other areas like fiscal spending, which we finally did a couple of years ago. Can we do it again with an infrastructure program or tax cuts? I don't know. But we definitely, the problem with depending on the Fed completely is something that can only last so long.
And of course, we have a US presidential election happening next year, where the US-China trade war is still dragging on. Do you think the prospect of perhaps losing his job might spur Donald Trump to perhaps reach some sort of an agreement before campaigning gets underway proper?
Yes, I do. The one thing is, I think this trade war or this conflict, economic conflict with China, is going to last a long, long time. However, many years, in fact. However, I do believe that President Trump will try to make a smaller deal, not a comprehensive one, because he can't get a comprehensive one. China will not secede to his to what he really wishes for a long-term deal. But I do think he'll try to get something done. It may not happen until the end of this year or even early next year, before the campaign really gets rolling, and that gets rolling in February with the primaries on the Democratic Party. But I do think something will happen, and that will give us a little relief in the markets and in the economy. But on a long-term basis, I think this thing's going to be with us for a while, quite a while, and people, when they're thinking about their long-term investments, have to consider that.
Okay, let's see how it all unfolds. Matt Maley in Massachusetts, thank you for your analysis as always.